shared, may we really take it to heart and just do everything we can to not just hold on to this information ourselves, but also to share it with others that they too might have a plan of action in the event of emergency. And so we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Pastor Seth. So just a little disclaimer, if any of you come up with any questions anytime during the presentation, just type them into the chat and our moderator will screen the questions and then I will be asking them to the presenters at the end of each segment. So we don't have to wait till the complete end, but at the end of each segment, we're going to go over questions for each presenter. So just type them in the chat and we will get to them. And also we are going to be sending a couple more resources along with this presentation. So if your question doesn't get answered, we will also include those in that email that we're going to be sending. So I just want to just start us off. Our first presenter is Angel Hernandez. He's an emergency management coordinator. And so he is going to just take it away now.
Thank you, Celeste. Yeah, hear me? Cool. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to go ahead and learn, hopefully, a little bit more of how we could be more prepared for emergencies. The title of my presentation is Disasters Don't Wait, so neither should we. Next slide, please. So if many of you knew, this month, the month of September, is actually the month of national preparedness. It's where our nation, our state tries to promote how we could be better prepared. I know this year we've been dealing with COVID-19, but here in California, aside from COVID-19, there's been earthquakes, wildfires, excessive heat, and civil unrest for that matter. So what I want to do today is just share with you guys a few points, some tips on how you could be more prepared for these type of emergencies. Next slide, please. So the first thing that I recommend everyone should do is have a plan. It's really important to know that after a major disaster, let's say an earthquake, emergency responders like law enforcement, firefighters, they're not going to be able to respond to all the calls and needs that they're going to be getting right away. They actually have what's called critical infrastructures that they need to go look at first to make sure that they are secure before they could respond to other calls. So it's very important that as a family, or you guys, create a family plan so that you guys are able to take care of yourselves for at least 3 to 10 days. And I've put here just a list of questions that I recommend everyone have in their plan, and as a family, they get together and go ahead and review these questions and hopefully have answers for. Some of these things that we should all have or know what to do is evacuation routes. It's very simple, but it's very important. When there's a fire, when there's an earthquake, you want to make sure you could get out safely and know where you're going to go. You also want to keep in mind to have a meeting place, because it's very likely that when an earthquake, again, for example, takes place, not everyone's going to be at one area. Not everyone might be home. Some people might be at work. The kids may be at school. So you guys need to think beforehand where you guys are going to meet. Another very, very important thing that I want to mention about in this slide is that you need to know where all the utility shutoffs are in your house, because it's very likely that pipes may get broken and you need to know how to shut them off. I'm going to go into more detail over all these questions throughout my presentation. So can I get the next slide, please? Next slide. Cool, thanks. So once you've gone through all the questions with your family, the ones I had listed, I really recommend that you go ahead and make it personal to your specific household. It's possible that you have children in your house, you may have seniors, pets, or people with disabilities. So make sure that you make your plan specific to meet their needs. If they need medications, or if they need, let's say, electricity to keep their equipment working to help them, you got to make sure you keep in mind how you're going to be able to deal with that if, for example, there's a power outage. So that's one thing that's very important. Once you've gone through the whole like specifics of everything, I recommend that you fill out a plan. Online, there's a bunch of plans that you could download. Ready.gov has one. I actually printed it out here. It's about 8 pages long. And you can go ahead and answer all the questions that I had mentioned in that slide. So it's super important to just have it down on paper so that everyone in your household knows what they're going to do. After you get this, I really recommend that you practice the plan. When you're practicing it, you're probably going to learn some things that you thought would work, didn't work, or you could think of better ideas and make sure that, you know, you're staying, how do I say it? You want to make sure that practice makes perfect. So the more that you do it, the better you're going to be prepared for anything that happens. It's not going to come to a shock. It'll be more like second nature. Next slide, please. The next thing, or the next recommendation that I recommend everyone do is have an emergency kit. Create a supply of, create a limited supply that you're going to have just in case of an emergency. So Kelly Gonzalez is actually going to go into a lot more detail with this, but from my end, what I want to make sure that we all do is make sure we have food and water. Those are the two main things really that we're going to need to be able to survive on our own. In regards to water, it's recommended to have 1 gallon of water per person per day. So for example, in my household, there's 4 of us. And so I have those 5-gallon like big water bottles that you guys could get at the water store. And we have about 4 of those that we just keep safely secured. You could also use chlorine tablets. All those things are things that you could use to make sure that your family has the supplies. Next slide. The next thing you want to do is once you've created this emergency kit, you want to make sure you're checking up on it at least every 6 months. You want to make sure there's nothing has expired. You want to make sure that where you store it is in a safe, secure place that is not affected by the sun or excessive heat. And then every year, I recommend going through your emergency kit. And if you have, for example, a toddler that has now grown, make sure you're changing out the clothes that you've put in there so that you have the supplies for your children or for your family. The next thing to consider is where to store your emergency supplies. And a lot of people ask, well, where's the safest place to store an emergency kit? One place, if you have a 1-story house, would be actually the garage, because usually the garage is built on a concrete foundation, so it's a lot more stable. Another place that you want to have some supplies, at least a 24-hour limited supply, is in your car. Keeping it in your car or even having some things in your work is super important. Next slide, please. So the next thing that's very important to do is to make sure that you stay informed. So being informed, the main thing about that is knowing what type of disasters are most likely to occur in your area. So if here in California, we know we're gonna have earthquakes. As you all know, we've been dealing with a lot of fires, record-breaking fires. Due to excessive heat, they've been doing public safety power outages, so where they shut off the electricity. And depending where you live in California, you could deal with landslides. So those are all things that you should keep in mind and prepare for specifically when you're creating your plan. The other thing to keep in mind on how you can stay informed is when a big disaster takes place, local services like the police department or even the county send out emergency alerts. They let you know to evacuate or that something's going on in your area. So what I recommend you all do is make sure first that your phone has the ability to do that. All iPhones nowadays or smartphones have this ability automatically. But if you feel like you're not sure if you can receive those alerts, call your wireless provider and they should be able to hook you up with that. Next slide. So now I want to go a little bit in detail on things you should do before, during, and after certain disasters. And I'm going to start off with earthquakes. So in planning to plan before a disaster, things that I really recommend everyone do is to identify safe spots in your home. You want to know, where all your windows are at. Want to make sure that as an instinct, you don't go towards the area where there's windows, but towards an area where possibly there's a sturdy table that you could go under. You want to make sure you're securing all the large major appliances, kind of like your water heater, maybe the fridge, a big screen TV, things that might go flying. You want to make sure you keep those secure. A really important one that I want to talk about, and I'll mention more in the next slide, is how to shut off your gas, your water, and your electricity. So I'll say that in the next slide. The next thing that I think is very important is to have a out-of-state contact in your phone or established for everyone in your family to call. The reason this is important is because if there's going to be, let's say there's an earthquake in a general area and it affected that general population, first of all, everyone's going to be making a lot of calls or trying to get a hold of people. Second of all, it's very likely that power lines will be out. So it's believed that you would have more probability of getting your call to go through on long distance calls. So that's why it's very important to have an out-of-state contact and have everyone know that that's the person to call. For example, in my household, I have my brother, Miguel. He lives in Arizona, and my family knows to go ahead and give him a call, let him know that I'm okay, and then everyone calls my brother Miguel, and he'll be the one reporting to us, letting us know, okay, Angel's fine, Yvette's fine. And that's just a way that we could assure that, we're all communicating towards him and getting the information back. It's more likely to happen that way. And of course, if you should be obtaining earthquake insurance. Next slide, please. So this is actually one of the slides I wanted to show you guys all is knowing, for all the adults, you guys should know how to shut off properly all your utility appliances. That'd be the gas, the water, and even the electricity. I didn't have an electricity photo on here, but for the gas and the water, the way you can know if you've properly shut off the valve is, right now all of these are actually parallel. If you see that red circle, it's actually parallel to the pipe. So that's letting you know that it's flowing and that gas or water is going through. What you would like to do is turn it 90 degrees to go ahead and shut off the water. And the reason you want to do this, or the gas, and the reason you want to do this is because after an earthquake, it's very likely that underground water pipes or sewage pipes might break, and you don't want to contaminate the water or the storage that you have inside your household. So if you're able to, and it's safe to do so, we recommend to go out, and shut off mainly the water, because you want to assure that all the water that's saved in your heating container can be preserved from contaminants. So that's just a helpful tip for you guys. Next slide. During a quake, we've gone through this a lot in school. Again, it's just very important to make sure that you know places where you could protect yourself from and take cover. If there isn't anything around, make sure you just duck, cover your head and neck so that nothing potentially could damage you that way or hit you that way. And if you're indoors, don't run outside or don't try to go outside. They recommend to just stay indoors. You may trip, something falling from outside when you walk outside can hit you, so we recommend you stay where you're at. Now, after a quake, again, I've talked about making sure you're sending actually a text. Texts are more likely to go through than a phone call. So make sure you text your loved ones and have that out-of-state contact. And make sure that if it's safe to do so, check your utility leaks to assure that you're able to, if you need to, shut off all those utility appliances. If for whatever reason your phone isn't working, it's very important to have maybe a radio, and then be prepared for aftershocks. Next slide, please. So again, it's no secret, this year has been crazy. We've been dealing with a lot of wildfires. It's not really a fun fact. It's not fun at all. But this actually has been, we've had 3 of the largest fires in our history over the last 3 months. So it's something we really got to take serious. We really got to have a plan in place. And in case of, for the wildfires, I really recommend that you can, if you're told to evacuate if you receive a text, get a phone call, please do so. And if you're trapped, as always, call 911, and definitely have in your emergency kit N95 masks, because those will help you keep all the particles in the air so that you won't breathe them in. Next slide, please. So a secondary effect, or something that could happen possibly in your house if you leave the stove on accidentally or stuff like that, is a fire. But many times after an earthquake, a secondary effect, as I mentioned, could be a house fire. Due to broken pipes, a fire could take place. So things that we should be keeping in mind before a fire is, again, identifying multiple exit routes. And one thing that I hadn't thought about I hadn't thought about it before, but now, I mean, I know it's very important, is to have a secondary route for those in the second room or in the second floor. And they have this in Home Depot. They're Home Depot or Lowe's. They're basically evacuation ladders that you could hook up to the side of your window and be able to go down from there. So if you can't go out through your main exit, you could always go out through the side window in your second floor. So I recommend anyone who has a 2-story house have one of those. You want to make sure that your smoke alarms are functioning properly. You want to make sure that you know how to properly use, and hopefully you have this, use a fire extinguisher. And then also I'd recommend, if you don't want to purchase a fireproof safe to keep all your emergency important documents, make sure and make digital copies for all the important documents for yourself. So during a fire, if you're able to get out of your house, go ahead and do so. But let's say that you're not. Let's say it was happening in the middle of the night and you're in your room sleeping, and you wake up and there's a fire. If your door is closed, we recommend it, or it's recommended when you go up to your door to use the back of your hand and feel from the bottom to the top for heat. If it's, when you're touching the doorknob, if it's really, really hot and you can't, you can't open it to yourself, don't try to do so. But if you have to, if that's like your only way out and you feel like that's the smartest thing to do at that moment, when you open the door, keep in mind to open it slowly, because if you open it really fast, the oxygen actually in your room, and if there's like a fire right there, could actually cause an explosion. So you want to make sure you crack the door open very slowly. And if you're not able to evacuate for any reason, make sure you cover the door with whatever you got so that air is not going in, and you cover your mouth with a cloth or something and call 911. Next slide. So after a fire, it's really important to know the resources that are available to you. One major resource would be the Red Cross. They could provide temporary housing, food, medication if you need it. It's also important, if you did beforehand have fire insurance, to contact your insurance company to see what they could provide, or all the reimbursements that they may be able to provide you. You want to make sure that you don't go back into your house until a building inspector from the fire department has allowed you to do so, because it may be unstable. So you want to make sure you get proper notification that you're able to do that. And take pictures of everything, all the damage, to have proof for when you're dealing with the insurance companies. Next slide. So lastly, I just want to recommend that everyone get involved. You know, in your family, if you have young ones, or if you have elementary students, have them feel like they're able to do something and be part of the solution for creating a plan in your house. I put a picture here of a kid drawing pretty much of how to escape, you know, their household. And this would work just fine. There's 2 alternate routes. There's, you know, they had fun with it. So make sure you get your kids and everyone in your family involved in your plan so that they could feel empowered. And another thing I'd recommend that everyone do, if you're able to do so, is check in with your city or with your community and see if they offer what's called CERT. and it stands for Community Emergency Response Team. The CERT program actually gives you a lot of basic emergency response skills that could be helpful when a disaster strikes next. So yeah, that's my presentation. I hope you guys learned something, and I went ahead and provided some resources that you guys could click on to have fillable templates on how to create a plan and prepare for specific disasters. Thank you. Any questions?
Awesome, Angel. That was super informative. Like, I want to go make a plan right now. Like, I really feel like it's so much information that I wasn't aware of. So thank you. So we have 2 questions for you that were already asked. And then if anyone else has any questions, you can still go ahead and put them in the chat. But the first question is, can we get these slides after? The answer is yes. We will be emailing these to all of you. And if you didn't register on Eventbrite, then please just, again, put your email in the chat so that or you can send your email privately to the Anaheim SDA in the chat, and then we will send it to you after. And then the second question is, how many times, this is for you, Angel, how many times should we drill? How
many
often?
times do you do a drill? I would say quarterly. So if you could, once you create your plan, go ahead and each quarter create a different scenario with your family. You could do an earthquake, you could do a fire in a certain location. You could even plan, a good one would be like a power outage for a weekend. So try for a whole weekend to not have power and just see how it goes. You're gonna have to pull out the camping gear and get creative. But yeah, I would recommend at least quarterly, so every 3 months or so.
Thank you. I like that one. I think it takes some of the fear out of that situation because you're prepared, and then in the moment when you're practicing, you can make it fun. So I like that. And then our third question is from Alfredo. They are asking if there is any way we can help volunteer for emergency relief in our community if there's ever a disaster.
Is there any way we can help for emergency relief? Yeah, definitely. So first, I'd probably recommend for you to do is get a hold of your city or law enforcement. A lot of times they offer programs like I mentioned, like CERT, and that's where you could go and receive the training. And then after the fact, what you can do is just conduct, maybe at your church or at other locations, that the training that you received. So everything is very hands-on in the sense that when you receive the training, you can go and then train other people in your community on how to be more prepared. So yeah.
Yeah, and then as he mentioned, just to add on, I know the Red Cross is always looking for volunteers, but there are a lot of other nonprofit organizations that provide disaster relief. One that's just coming to the top of my head is called All Hands, All Hearts. And so, yeah, they do it, locally, but then if you want to volunteer, they sent people to Katrina, they sent people to Texas after the hurricane a couple years ago. And so that's just one, but there's a bunch of those as well if you're like really trying to get into it. And then one other question that we have from Jacob is, how is the government going to help us after a disaster?
So the main thing that the government's gonna do or keep in mind once a disaster strikes is their main priority is to save lives. So they're gonna be working, your local government is gonna be working on preserving life, preserving property, and then preserving the environment. So those are the main things that they're going to be working on. After the fact, they could be working on providing, let's say, shelters for those who have lost homes. They'll be providing food. Those are some of the things that they would be doing. Another thing that they'll do, like let's say if it's a local government like your city and they run out of resources, they have the plans in place to request mutual aid to make sure that your specific city is going to receive the needs it needs to, try to mitigate the situation at that point and start going to a recovery phase.
And we have two more really quick. The first one is, does our church specifically have a plan? So I believe this is directed at the Anaheim church. Yeah.
That's actually one of the things that I'm going to be working on with our church. We have a basic evacuation plan, if I remember correctly, the pastor mentioned to me, but I want to really move forward and kind of get into the specifics of creating an emergency operation plan for our church.
Awesome. And I think Relove might have to hire you to do that for us too. And then one other question, should we save canned goods or army rations? Is there one that's better?
Both work. Both work. I think what's actually pretty cool is if you've heard about the MREs, that's kind of what the military uses. Those are very, very helpful. They give you, what you need to survive, but canned goods work as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Angel, again, so much for all your information. It's super helpful. And thank you, everyone, for all of those questions as well. So next, we are going into medical preparation. So I would like to introduce Kelly Gonzalez. She is a public health nurse. So she's going to be talking about first aid and how to prepare for the medications we normally need and others we might use in case of an emergency.
All right, hello everyone, and I hope that you all enjoyed the first part of the presentation and learned a lot. So I'm going to be going over medical preparation. So there's going to be two parts to my presentation. First, I'm going to go over what goes in a first aid kit. And then I'm going to go over common injuries that happen as a result of the disasters that happen here in Southern California. So first of all, let's go ahead and dive right in. What goes into a first aid kit? So it's going to be made up of medications, medical supplies, and I'll be going into more detail about those in a bit. A copy of prescriptions, if you have special medications that you take every day from your, that were prescribed by your doctor, you're going to want to have a copy of those prescriptions in your first aid kit so that you can grab if you have to evacuate. That way, if you can't get to your prescriptions because they're buried under rubble or something, you can go to a pharmacy or a hospital and get those prescriptions. Also, a copy of your medical insurance and other important medical records so that if you need to go to a hospital, you won't have to struggle as much and you'll already have everything that you need. And I recommend that you have a first aid kit both in your home, like a large one, and then in your car, a smaller one, so because you never know what happens when you're driving as well. Okay, next slide. All right, so I'm gonna go over some of the medications that you can have in your first aid kit. There's so many medications out there that you can have, but I'm just going to go over the basic ones. So medicine like Tylenol and ibuprofen, they treat both pain and fever, and ibuprofen also treats inflammation. If your symptoms are ongoing and you've already taken one or the other, you can go ahead and alternate between both medications. I encourage everyone to follow the instructions on the box or on the back of the bottles to make sure that you don't overdose. I mean, I think these probably seem pretty harmless to you guys, but you can still overdose on them. When it comes to children, the doses are very different for both of these medications, for any medication really. Doses are usually based on a children's weight and not age. So be careful to not use medicine that is for adults for children. If you have children, make sure that you're also packing children's medications in your first aid kit as well. Next is antihistamines. These are all medications, a class of medications that treat allergies and its symptoms such as runny nose, congestion, itchiness. So examples of these types of medications are Benadryl, Zyrtex, and Claritin. Anti-diarrheal medications, I think you guys know what that is for, but it's for to treat abdominal symptoms such as nausea and vomiting as well. Next. Antibacterial ointments such as Neosporin is important to have in order to treat cuts and any like small open wounds, blisters. Sunscreen is important to have as well, just in case let's say you're not going to have shelter for a few days, and sunscreen will help protect your skin from getting sunburned. Aloe vera gel to treat any of those sunburns, and cough and cold syrups as well. So remember, for cough and cold syrups, also keep in mind children doses. Next, please. All right, so these are specialized meds that aren't necessarily going to go into your first aid kit, and not everyone's gonna need these either. It goes on a person by person basis. So these are medications that you're gonna wanna have ready at hand just in case you need to evacuate the home. So stuff like insulin for diabetic people or other diabetic medications that you may take. Asthma prescriptions such as your inhaler. EpiPen for people who are severely allergic to things such as bee stings or like peanut butter. And baby formula. You may not consider baby formula a medication, but if you leave without it, it could be very difficult to find formula in case of a really big disaster. So go ahead and grab a few cans before you go. Okay, next. Next are medical supplies that you are going to have in your first aid kit. And in a bit, I'm gonna show you what kind of supplies I have in my first aid kit. So I'm just gonna go over the supplies real quick before I show you. Things like hand sanitizer, alcohol wipes, hydrogen peroxide. And for hydrogen peroxide, remember that the liquid must be kept in the dark bottle that you buy it. Bandages and gauzes of different sizes, thermometer, instant ice packs, warm packs, splint, emergency blanket, tape, scissors, tweezers, gloves, water, water purifying tablets just in case your water supply runs out, tongue depressors, and some things that not everyone's gonna have in their first aid kit, but depending on who you are, you might need it. So things such as feminine products, tampons and pads, diapers, colostomy bags. If you don't know what a colostomy bag is, don't worry, you don't need it. Diaper rash and diaper rash cream. So right now I'm gonna show you guys an example of a first aid kit. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but it's really small. I ordered it off of Amazon thinking it was gonna be super huge, but it's really small. But guess what? It has everything that you need. So this one's gonna be a good one to keep in my car. All right, and inside, you can see that it has a bunch of things. So stuff like gauzes, gloves, alcohol wipes. This one's a cool one. The emergency blanket. I know it looks tiny, but if you want to ask me later about a friend who forgot his sleeping bag when we went camping, this worked for him. And yeah, just a bunch of things. So something simple like that can be kept in your car for like any small emergencies or for simple first aid. Okay. All right. So that was it for the first aid kit. So on to the next part, disasters in SoCal. Dun, dun, dun. So I'm going to be talking about the common injuries that happen as a result of disasters that happen here in SoCal. So I don't know if you guys can guess by the pictures what I'm going to talk about, but here we go. So first up is fires. So next slide, please. The common injuries that happen as a result of fires are respiratory issues and burns. So I know you guys have probably seen how the sky looks these past few weeks. It's brown, it's dreary, there's so much smoke in the air. And when there is so much smoke in the air, it makes the air quality really unhealthy. So this air quality can lead to symptoms such as coughing, trouble breathing, allergies, and stuff like that. And so if you've never had problems with your lungs. You might even have some of these issues. Go to your doctor if you need any additional help with that. So if you're having issues like that, you can only imagine how people who actually have illnesses such as COPD or asthma. So if you have meds that your doctor has prescribed you for your respiratory illnesses, please go ahead and continue to take them. If you're suffering of an exacerbation or your symptoms get worse, then make sure to go to your doctor as well, and you may even need to be seen at the emergency room. As always, evacuate if you are ordered to evacuate, and avoid any outdoor activities when the air quality is super bad. Even in places like the Inland Empire, if the air quality is bad, children won't be able, like schools will say that children can't go outside and play. Next is burns. So as you can see by the picture right here, there are many different types of burns. A burn can be something as simple as a sunburn, or something like where you can see the meat under your skin and it's full of blisters, and where your nerve endings are all like burnt off. So if it's something as simple as a sunburn, even though you're gonna suffer for a few days, like I did after standing in the DMV line for 3.5 hours, it's gonna hurt for a little while, but just you can put aloe vera on it and make sure you don't go under the sun without protection again. For any burns that are more severe than that, with like blisters filled with water, or where the skin is exposed underneath, you're going to want to go to either urgent care or an emergency room, depending on how severe your burn is, because burns are very susceptible to infection. So that area needs to be maintained clean and free of any type of infection, and seen by a doctor. All right, we can go ahead to the next slide. The next natural disaster that happens in California a lot are earthquakes. So the most common injuries from earthquakes will be broken limbs, bruises, cuts, and bleeding, and falls. So if you have a broken limb, make sure to keep that area offloaded. Don't put any pressure on it. If it's your leg, don't be walking around. If it's your arm, don't be carrying anything. You can make a splint or a sling. Sometimes first aid kits have it. And then make sure that you go seek medical attention so that you get an x-ray and see the extent of the injury. Bruises and cuts, you can treat by cleaning them, using antibacterial ointment on them. If there's bleeding, make sure to put pressure on the area that is bleeding. If someone is has a puncture wound, or they're impaled by an object such as like a large piece of wood or a pipe, do not take the pipe out of their body, because you can cause for them to bleed out. You don't know what kind of arteries have been damaged. So if you see them like that, just call 911 as soon as you can. Falls, concussions can happen as a result of a fall if something hits your head. Some signs of concussions, they will all be neurological symptoms. So things like confusion, dizziness, blurry vision, headache, and forgetfulness, they're all signs of a concussion. And please see a doctor if you see someone with those kinds of symptoms, because they need to be assessed to see how severe the concussion is. And if they are not seen, and let's say they hit their head again, they fall again, and the concussion becomes worse, they can also have a brain bleed. All right, next, please. All right, and now the last disaster I will talk about is going to be pandemic, specifically COVID-19, and it is a disaster. COVID-19 stands for coronavirus disease 19 because it was found in 2019, not because there are 19 types of coronavirus. I'll be talking about some signs and symptoms, and also where you can get tested. So some signs and symptoms are fever over 100.3 degrees. If you have a lower fever, but you're also exhibiting other symptoms or have had close contact to someone who is positive, you can please go ahead and contact your doctor to see if you should be tested for coronavirus. Other symptoms include dry cough, chills, weakness, muscle aches, shortness of breath, loss of taste and or smell. And in older adults, symptoms tend to present differently. So in older adults, if you start seeing them have a change in their mental status, confusion, or abdominal symptoms such as diarrhea, nausea, vomiting, and you can also go ahead and see if they can be tested. The thing about coronavirus is that some people are asymptomatic, so it's important to protect our loved ones who are immunocompromised or who are older. All right, next slide. So if you want to be tested, I recommend that you first contact your primary provider. And sometimes they are able to go ahead and get you tested at the clinic or office that they have, or send you somewhere that you can get tested. Otherwise, if there's no other place that you can go, here are two places in Orange County that you can get tested. The Anaheim Convention Center and Costa Mesa Fairgrounds are both super sites that have a lot of appointments now. You have to make an appointment through that link right there. So you can go ahead and take a picture of it, or when we send you the slides, you can look at that. So if you do not have insurance, don't worry about it. Still make an appointment, because right now you will not be charged for that test. All right. Okay, so I think this ends my part of the presentation. There's a lot to cover, but little time. So if you guys have any questions right now, you can go ahead and ask.
Thank you so much, Kelly. That was super helpful. I definitely need to get a first aid kit. I just have like Band-Aids and Neosporin, that's it. So should probably add something to it. But yeah, so if you haven't asked the question already, please type it in, but we do have two questions already. The first one is, do you suggest we take a CPR class?
Yeah, so there are, in one of the slides that I sent, that will be sent to you guys as a resource, I put examples where you guys can do CPR classes. So
Awesome.
you can, usually they're paid for, but if you, sometimes in your community, you might see classes that will be offered at a lower rate. Or for example, if you're gonna have a baby, sometimes the hospital that you're gonna deliver with will offer free CPR classes for you. So places like the Red Cross is a big one. Here in Orange County, I really like one called Surefire CPR, because it's taught by nurses and paramedics. And like places like hospitals as well will sometimes host CPR classes.
Awesome, thank you. And then second question, is immunity to COVID lasting?
Well, we do not know yet, because it's such a new virus, and right now we're all like living through the how much we discover of it. You know, when polio first started, we didn't know much about it, and right now we're getting to see the process of how long people go without getting it again, or if it's going to be an immunity that lasts forever. So stay tuned. We'll all learn together about those kinds of things.
Okay, and then we have another one in the chat from Jenny. They're saying on one of the preparedness classes, they said if you squeeze your finger, it can tell what symptom of injury. Said it was done in an event and they forgot. I'm not really sure what they're referring to, but squeezing your finger, you can tell something about your injury.
Well, yeah, so
something to do with it could tell whether or not you have high blood pressure, or if you need to see a doctor right away, that if you squeeze it, it stays white.
Okay, so
what is that sign? I forgot. I'm sorry.
perfusion. So if you squeeze your fingers and it stays white, or like your hand and it stays white, it means your blood is not circulating through your body the way it's supposed to. So you should be seeing a doctor for that.
Okay, that makes sense. And then lastly,
but wait. Can I ask one more thing? So if it's like in an earthquake situation, and you see that on one of the people, and you can't get to a doctor, what can you do?
So if you go to like the hospital, in situations like an earthquake or a very huge disaster, places like hospitals will be full. They'll be super packed. And so what they do is that they triage everyone to see how serious your injury is. So if they see that, then they can decide whether that person can wait to be seen or if they should be seen all at once.
thank you.
But we can't get to a hospital. I'm thinking of, earthquake, the big one. We can't get to the hospital. We can't drive there. We only see a person next to us. I'm thinking worst case scenario here.
Well, and like things like that, you're gonna want to see if there's other signs like of bleeding, any other symptoms that they're having. Unfortunately, the best that we can do without having all the supplies that we need is to stabilize them as best as we can. So you're gonna want to look for other signs that they're exhibiting. If they're not getting enough perfusion, like let's say to their head, to put them on their back and lift their legs so that they're getting enough blood supply to their most vital organs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, one more really quick question because we do have to move on. For expired medication, should we toss them or save them?
Expired medications should definitely be tossed. We don't want you guys to get sick from taking medicine. So that's why it's important to be checking your first aid kit and your emergency kit every so often to check for any expired items, both food and medicine.
Awesome. And then really quick, just to interject, correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but they say the proper way to dispose of medications is to take them, if you can, take them to like the hospital or the doctor, correct? Not like just flush them or toss them. Am I off on that?
No, especially if like they're controlled medications such as narcotics. That's what I used to do. I have to destroy medication. Either use sometimes there's a liquid that places use to get rid of all the medication. So yeah, make sure you're getting rid of the medication in a safe way.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you again so much, Kelly. We are going to move on to our next presenter. We have Sylvia Salto. She is a social worker, and she's going to be talking about special considerations for children and elderly family members.
Okay, hi everybody. Are we all overwhelmed with all this abounds of information that we're probably already making mental plans to get a family meeting together and organize ourselves, which is good, which is the purpose of this presentation. What I'm specifically going to be talking about is the considerations that we have to make and think about in our process for the safety planning is what is going to be the response in our family for children and older adults when these disasters occur. So generally, we think an earthquake, a couple days, and, thankfully it's been, easily resolved as far as we haven't had huge earthquakes right now. But then we have the pandemic to show us that things can last for a long time. So maybe our immediate response is to okay, 1 week. I mean, I know some of us got an idea that 2 weeks would happen. We would isolate at home with this coronavirus. And then here we are, months, ending the year probably with the same situation where we're having to take extra precautions. And by now, everybody has suffered emotionally, mentally differently to all the changes that were caused by this disaster. So how do we plan to address these topics of continuous stress on children and the elderly. So we're going to start with children. Children display stress differently than adults. So a child's never, not usually, I should say, going to come up to an adult and say, hey, I think I have a worry. Like I've been dreaming this and I don't know what it means. Talk to me, explain to me what's going on. What am I feeling? They're never going to come up directly to say these things. So children are probably going to start expressing different behaviors, different changes of when they're feeling or processing trauma. So here you could see the list of the different changes that you will observe as an adult in the household on children. There will be changes in their sleeping pattern, bedwetting, things that have stopped and they're already, like they return. If they had trouble going to sleep when they were younger, they will start having those same problems now. Changes in appetite, children get very specific about foods that they're eating and when they're suffering some kind of stress, or they could just stop eating, not feeling hungry, not craving any type of food. So each child is different, but these are definitely things to look out for. School-age children will have difficulty concentrating on tasks and focusing on different school assignments, as probably some parents have seen going to school from home. It's very hard to get the children to like focus on what they have to do or to want to do the work. You see children staying up late all night, probably video games or being on their phone. And then during the day, they're just like zombies. They're not able to focus. And that adds to the factor that they're not able to focus due to all the emotional turmoil that they're expressing. Older children, teens, preteens, some of them start to just act out. They either talk back or they have, they start using a lot of bad language, or some of them start participating in self-harming behavior, whether it's not sleeping at all or trying alcohol that's in the home. Any substances, whether it's like prescribed medication or like paint, inhaling paint. So you want to look out for those behaviors, as well as like running away at night and coming back in the day. I know some children are very good at covering these behaviors out. So just you being aware that it's a possibility. It has nothing to do with the child being a bad or a good child, as some parents like to say. It's more about, they're looking for a way to be able to like detach from everything that they're going through. Next slide. So how do we begin the conversation? With each child, it's different, but it's important to listen and let them set the tone and the speed of the conversation. So an example I could give you is a child asked me in the beginning of this pandemic, Sylvia, is this coronavirus the beginning of the zombie apocalypse? And I was caught off guard because I don't know anything about zombies, first of all. And second of all, because I thought he was very young to know about apocalypses and zombies, but video games, then they know what they're talking about. So it's important in a situation like that to address like at their level. So if I would have started to talk about, well, the coronavirus is a virus, it has nothing to do with zombies, it would totally get that child uninterested and would feel like, okay, they're not addressing what I asked, and they would not pay attention. So the proper way to go through that was more, okay, well, what do you think the zombie apocalypse is? And then he just started saying, well, people die, and then everybody's dying on the news. Everybody says that they're dying. So that means we'll eventually have to be eating each other because there's going to be no food. And then it was a process of saying, well, who protects you now in an emergency? My grandma, my mom. And okay, and then just kind of walking through them, like, if there is an emergency, where do you think is going to happen in the situation? If there's an earthquake, who do you think you'll be with? Oh, I'll either be at school, or I'll either be with my friends or at home, and who's in charge? Like reminding them that there's always an adult in charge and that they can reach out to somebody else. So addressing what their main fear, worry, or thought is in an emergency is the key to having this conversation with the child. If their main worry is that they're going to be separated from the family, then you can just reassure how that's going to be avoided at as much as possible within the control of what you can plan for. If their main worry is they're not going to have a place to sleep or a place to live, then you address those individually per child. Including the child in the safety plan, as Angel covered, is important. And some of the things that you need to consider is how the child wants to know information about certain disasters, different age limits, the kind of information that they want to know. Some kids like to be really informed, and you know, if a child is watched a movie or something about a tsunami and they think an earthquake is going to result automatically in a tsunami, you kind of just need to guide them on the information of what do you want to know and how much do you want to know. So another thing is to pay attention to their child, how they talk when they're playing with others or when they're playing by themselves, and how they talk with their peers, which is other children. So sometimes children, it's the only time that they have that they don't censor themselves or they don't like scream what they're saying. So they will talk to their toy dinosaurs or whatever they're playing, and they'll just start saying whatever they're thinking. So having a listening ear to that as you are in the home with them or wherever you are kind of gives you a guide of what conversations you need to be having with them and what you need to be addressing, because that's when they kind of have their guard down and they're just voicing what they're already thinking. Next slide. So reminders for the adults responsible to make sure that the kids go through this process and feel supported is to set the example. If you panic, a child will panic. So they're always going to be looking to you for a guide, as they are, because that's what children do. But in an emergency, you always want to remain calm, because a child will always feed off your energy. Have open communication by doing the safety plan and planning ahead. It kind of reduces their feelings of like worries, whatever they're feeling or thoughts that they're having, and they're able to better address it when the situation actually happens. Another key thing that happens is that when people make their safety kits or whatever plan they have, they forget that sometimes you're going to be displaced from your house. There's a possibility you even won't be able to come home to get stuff for yourself. So it's important, if you have a younger child, preschool, toddler age, to kind of keep in mind what it makes them feel safe. Every child has a security item that they have. Some kids it's a safety blanket, some kids it's a teddy bear, some older children will be like their favorite sweatshirt or jacket or tennis shoes. Make sure that you put that in mind into your safety plan, because that is always going to bring them a sense of security wherever they are or whatever they're going through. So it's important to consider even snacks that are like the child's favorite, when you're displaced from your home or you're staying in a shelter because you're not able to return to the area, they're not going to have available items that, are favorite to your child. But if you have, I'm not saying you have to have like a Costco size pack of like gummy snacks, but if you have a couple, when you see that the child's experiencing a lot of like emotional response to the situation, you could give them something that makes them feel like, okay, they're getting a treat, something normal, or something that makes them feel better. And ultimately, just take care of yourself and talk to other adults in a safe space. I know in disasters, in the current pandemic, situations like this, adults tend to talk to other adults in front of children, whether it's on the phone or just having conversations with other adults in the home. Children are always listening, so be mindful of the conversations you're having, because just because you're not directly talking to them doesn't mean that they're not listening and increasing whatever stress or worries that they already have. Next slide. So older adults are adults that are 75 years or older, and some live with our families, others live independently. Whether they live with you or apart from you, it's important to have this conversation with them as well. You have to consider that a lot of older adults already have a mindset of they're possibly a burden to the family because they're not as independent as they were when they were younger. So an older adult is not going to want to automatically hold a conversation about, in case of an emergency, what will happen, because their mindset is different than ours or a younger person, because they kind of live in the perspective of like a short time span, whether it's like this year or from this birthday to the next birthday, as opposed to a lot of us live in 5 years and 10 years, I have an outlook of this life of what I want. They live in a shorter like time frame. So they're not always gonna want to think about a disaster that may or may not happen before they're no longer alive. So they will think, this is not something that I need to think about. Like, when was the last time we had an earthquake? Like, oh, a pandemic? Okay, well, now we're living one. But before this, they probably thought, okay, the flu in 19 something, that skipped me, so I don't have to worry about it. But the reality is that we still need to hold these conversations because they're an emergency and a disaster for a reason, that we have no control of knowing when it will happen. And they're still important to be able to keep themselves safe mentally and physically as well. So some physical reactions that you'll see on older adults after or during a disaster are pretty much the same as children, where they have stomach aches, difficulty sleeping, headaches, but a lot of it is worsening of already diagnosed medical conditions. So that's something that's like a bigger trigger that you can notice. And as with children, probably older adults don't think it's something that is new. It's something that's, oh, it's just gotten worse because, you know, it's normal. I'm just getting older. My situation's getting worse. Next slide. So there's a long list for emotional reactions to disasters. And as you can see, there's probably memory problems, lack of focus and concentrations repeated as with children, and emotional numbness. A higher trigger for identifying that there's an emotional feeling attached to what's going on is the questioning of their own spiritual beliefs or anger with God, an increase in prayer, and a need to find a connection or reasoning or justification to what's going on, to what they've already know. So you'll hear older adults in a pandemic right now saying, well, we survived this in the world history, so this should be fine. And, you know, so what if we die? We can just, you know, we've lived our life. But they have like a very different one path focus. So you still have to have these conversations that, you know, you don't want to dismiss or think that these reactions or responses are similar to what they've already been experiencing due to their aging or their side effects of any medication. Next slide. So how to support and establish a conversation to address this with any older adults in your family. So again, make time to have the conversation. Don't assume that you know what they need in an emergency. Older adults are very aware of what they require to live their life or to be comfortable. So make sure you let them be in control of their safety plan. Giving them that control will give them part of a sense of security that they need in order to fully go through the safety plan in case of an emergency. You don't want them to be in a situation where there's an earthquake and they just sit there or lie there and think, this is my time, I'm just gonna let it be, whatever God wants or whatever destiny decides. No, you want them to be able to like think that there's a purpose why you guys had this conversation, and they know that they're in control of how they want to enact that scenario that you guys have practiced. So talking to also their medical professionals or physical therapists, whatever services they already receive, just to know how quickly they'll be accessible post an emergency or what could they do at home. Each person is different what their needs are, but you want to make sure that you think ahead of if these services are not available, if there's dialysis happening, if there's physical therapy happening where, you know, there's blood clots happening. You need to know what you would do and how long they can go without these services. And also for addressing for crisis, like will there be an emergency counseling or contact for somebody to kind of give them that talking space that they may need. Ultimately, also remind them that you're having this conversation and you're considering them not because it's a duty or because you're required to, or you just are checking a box out of a safety plan. You're including them and wanting to know how their response is and what they want to do in an emergency because you love them and you care about them. A lot of older adults feel like they've been pushed aside by the family and they're not the biggest concern, especially if there's kids involved or kids are a big part of the family. They just think that they have to take a step back and kind of not speak about their feelings or worries. So it's important to make sure that you remind them, we care about you and we want you to be as safe as possible if there were to be an emergency. And just like Angel and Kelly talked about establishing an out-of-town person to contact, when you do that, make sure it's a person that the older adult is comfortable talking to, because they will want to have constant communication. In this pandemic, I've seen older adults that say, you know, little Johnny didn't call me and it's been 2 days and everything's fine, but they want like that constant reminder because it gives them security that everybody that they love is safe. So establishing a person that's going to be available to kind of give them that reassurance is important to consider when identifying that family contact. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sylvia. We have 2 questions for you already asked. And then again, if anyone has any questions that they think of really quickly, you can put them in the chat, but we do need to go a little quick. Can we expect a child who's 3 years old to realize what is going on? I also have a 9-year-old. So just like the different ages, 3 and 9, are they aware, you know, at what capacity?
Yeah, my response would be a 6-month-old would know what's going on. Again, children feed off the energy that's around them. If there's something they may not be able to identify, this is like a really big event because everybody's worried, but they have their own form of noticing, like mom is acting different, dad, aunt, uncle, like what is going on? So that's why it's important to address the questions or their thoughts or comments at their level. So if they're talking about an imaginary person, with children at that age, 3-year-old, they do a lot of kind of like using pretend, if they have like a pretend friend or imaginary friend, or if they have, you know, a favorite stuffed animal, kind of using like a scenario where you would say, does little teddy bear Johnny, I'm sorry, I keep just using Johnny, but if this teddy bear Johnny were to be worried about something, what would they be worried about? And in that response, you could use it as a 3rd person guide of like, or you could have them draw something that right now is, you know, the scariest thing that could happen. And in that drawing, you could kind of get an idea that they might have. If it's like a big flame that they draw, then you think, oh, they think something's gonna catch on fire. I mean, obviously if you feel like you know your kid, you would be able to know if a conversation is different than what you've previously had with them. But they are able to capture that something is different. So it's good to address that something is different and they know, but just kind of go off of what you see from their response.
Thank you. Okay. How do I talk to my child about the possibility that an emergency can happen when they are not with me, like when they're in school?
It's important that everybody remembers that emergencies get talked about in school settings, in daycare settings, because everybody has to have an emergency plan. So it's not something that a child's going to be like, what? Life is not going to be perfect all the time. So addressing it, just kind of like saying, hey, have you guys talked about it in preschool and class about earthquakes? And then just going off of there, whatever they learn, and then just kind of saying like, how do you think we should do things at home if you're home when this happens?
Okay, and then we have 2 more questions. How do we handle a difficult situation when an older adult doesn't want to listen to your suggestions or directions because they tell you they know better? For example, they're your parent.
Okay. Yes. Denial is important part of process of processing an emergency. So yeah, if you get that kind of like pushback, it's, like I said, important to remind them and bring them back to like, okay, you know the best for you, but I want to know what that plan is because I care about you and it'll make me feel better. So kind of just reflect back to you that you want to know so that you know they're safe. And then it'll kind of give the response like, okay, well, I think it's not going to happen 90%. We're not going to have a pandemic. And then you're like, okay, but what if we did? You know, how would I know that you're safe? And then just kind of guide them in that way.
Okay, that makes sense. And then last question, and then we need to move on. What is a good way to explain why we practice in case of an emergency without causing anxiety to a very sensitive child?
Can you repeat the beginning part of that?
So what's a good way to explain like why we're doing this without causing a sensitive child stress or anxiety?
Again, I think as being a parent or an adult in charge of a child, it's scary to address things, but from a young age, they've been watching cartoons or they've been watching things where, you know, an accidental fall, you don't plan for it. And then just kind of going off of that, like always see where the child is at. If they're saying like, do you know what an earthquake is? Do you know what a pandemic is? Well, now a lot of kids know, but, you know, just kind of start with the information of what they know and go from there.
Thank you. Thank you again. And if anyone else has any other questions that we didn't get to, still send them and then we will just answer them in an email. And lastly, I'm going to introduce Bianca Tolan. She is in clinical psychology and she is now going to talk about stress and how to manage that in emergency situations. So very related to our last question too. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Celeste. Actually, can you go back to the first slide? All right, hello and good evening, everyone. As mentioned, I am Bianca, and I'm going to be talking to you about managing stress in uncertain times. So some of the information here might be similar to what you've heard in Sylvia's presentation or previous presentations, but this is going to take like a larger, more generalized view. And so I'm going to give a brief overview about what stress is, and then work into some ways to manage it. All right. So I'm sure by now you're probably feeling a little overwhelmed. As previously discussed, there's just a lot that we talked about. And a lot of this might have you thinking about like, okay, I really need to start preparing now. Well, you know, when we feel like overwhelmed, you may feel like a little tense. Maybe you're starting to notice that your shoulders are creeping closer to your ears. Maybe you're feeling a bit anxious. Well, this is all great because that is what I'm going to talk about tonight, so we can get some hands-on experience and begin to like practice managing it all. All right, next slide. Okay, so what's your first reaction when you see this image? Well, if you were in the wild and if you're a normal person, then you probably have some feelings of being startled. Maybe like we mentioned, like tensing up of the muscles. Maybe your heart's starting to race, you're breathing faster. At least let's hope this is your natural response, because this is normal and this is what our natural response to danger is supposed to be. This is critical to our survival. So the response that we just talked about is known as the fight or flight response. And this allows you to quickly mobilize your body and get out of the danger. So during this response, as we mentioned, you're going to feel faster heart rate, faster breathing, tense muscles. There's going to be a release of blood sugar, glucose, and a release of fat from your temporary storage to different parts of your body to really just like mobilize those arms and legs and get you out of danger. But what happens when you're feeling that heightened response, but there is no bear or no danger? Well, this is what we know as chronic stress. Next slide. So when your body is experiencing stress for a long period of time, there are going to be several areas of your body and mind that can be negatively affected. You may experience symptoms such as I mentioned before, muscle tension. Maybe you're noticing some tightness in your jaw, like teeth grinding, maybe some headaches, stomach problems, as well as like some psychological symptoms such as anxiety and anger. Next slide. So we all experience stress in our day-to-day life. Anyone that doesn't experience stress at all is lying to you. So I think we can all agree that stress these days has been different to what we've mostly encountered in previous years, previous time periods. So what is it about this stress during COVID or natural disasters or even racial and political tension that makes it feel just so much worse? Well, I'm going to break it down into 3 different factors. So the first is that there is an element of unpredictability. Studies show that if stress can be anticipated, it is going to be much less damaging than if the stress is random. The second factor is if there's no time limit. So once again, this is something that we've seen with COVID, where we weren't given a time frame for how long this would last. I mean, we still don't know how long this is going to last. And finally, if there's a lack of support. So research indicates time and time again that the support of your loved ones or your community at large is so important in making sure that you are dealing with stress well. Next slide. All right. So by now, are you feeling more like the baby on the right or like the baby on the left? So I'm going to emphasize this because I think it is so important to really be aware of what emotions you're experiencing when you're stressed. After all, if you don't know what symptoms you have, what emotions you're experiencing, then how are you supposed to attend to it and fix it? So some things that you may be experiencing during chronic stress, even stress at large, maybe depressed moods, anxiety, irritability, maybe even some memory and concentration problems, compulsive behaviors, or mood swings. So the image on the bottom is what we call a mood rating scale. And as you can see with these smileys, they range from 1 star to 5 stars. So this really is a good indicator of how you're feeling from a day-to-day basis. So like right now, are you feeling more like a 1 or 2 or a 4 or 5? So once again, just being aware and observant of your emotional state and responses can really help you in better treating them. All right, next slide. All right, now we're going to get into actual management of it all. So here's an overview of the various techniques we will be talking about. The important thing to remember here is that stress and its management is not a one-size-fits-all. How one person responds to stress is going to be very different from how another person responds to stress, or even how you respond to stress from like a day-to-day basis or from event to event. So the important thing here is to have a toolbox. The more techniques you have in your toolbox, the more things you can draw on to really apply to whatever you're experiencing at the moment or whatever stress you're going through. Next slide. All right, so breaking it down, the first one is be kind to yourself. As I mentioned, everyone is going to be experiencing stress differently. You may have a different tolerance for unpredictability and react differently than someone else. That being said, you cannot compare yourself to others. You have to remind yourself that it's going to take time for stressful situations to resolve. And in the meantime, it's really important to just be patient. Next slide. Reflect on past successes. Chances are you have already overcome stressful events in the past. And if you're here tonight, you've survived them, so congratulations. So you really want to reflect on what you did during that event, those events that were helpful, and maybe think about what you'd like to do differently this time. Next slide. Develop new skills. So I don't know about any of you, if you've come up with some new skills during quarantine, but I definitely started baking bread. So that being said, you want to try things out of your comfort zone. So taking the risks of learning new skills, it really helps you develop confidence and even develop skills that may come in handy when life does not go as planned. Next slide. Limit exposure to news. This one is huge during a disaster. We have a natural tendency to just want to know what's going on, but sometimes we can just feel overwhelmed by all the news that we're bringing in, especially when it's all negative. So a term that really came out during this whole quarantine period, I don't know if you've heard of it, is doom scrolling. So this is just the tendency to continue to surf or scroll through bad news, news that is saddening, disheartening, or depressing. Like we mentioned previously, that whole fight or flight response, that whole reaction of being elevated, that is going to be heightened when you're just bringing in all this news. So compulsively checking the news only keeps you wound up. So really make sure that you limit check-ins, avoid the news during certain times of the day, such as like right before bed when you really want to be winding down. Next slide. Avoid dwelling on things that you can't control. So you really want to get out of the habit of ruminating on negative events. There's this therapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, and in it we have these things called cognitive distortions. These are really ways that the mind convinces us that something isn't really true. And so the goal of CBT is to learn and to identify and correct these distortions. So one of these is catastrophizing. I'm sure we all know someone who does this, or maybe we've done this ourselves, but when someone's catastrophizing, they just expect the worst to happen. So you really want to be aware of those thoughts and try and avoid them. Next slide. Take your own advice. So ask yourself, if a friend came to me with this worry, what would I tell them? Chances are we often give people better advice than we take ourselves. So maybe listen to yourself for a change. Next slide. Engage in self-care. So I know self-care has become a bit of a buzzword recently, but what really is it? Well, self-care really is just about taking care of your needs mentally, physically, spiritually. And this can entail several different domains, but part of this is just establishing routines, eating healthy, nourishing meals, getting regular exercise, plenty of sleep, and some people may find yoga and meditation to help release stress. But basically just taking care of your body and your mental health through nourishing foods, exercise, all of that is just going to help protect your body from the response to stress. Next slide. Seek support from those you trust. Like I mentioned before, support is so important. It's really easy to isolate yourself when you're feeling stressed or worried. That's just our natural response to kind of try and protect ourselves. But this is when it's especially important to just reach out to your family and friends. Next slide. And finally, ask for help. So if you are having trouble managing stress or coping with uncertainty, please don't be afraid to ask for help. That is what we are here for as psychologists and other mental health professionals. We've been trained to help people develop healthy ways to cope with stress. And really, there's no shame in reaching out for help. Next slide. All right, so now I'm going to give you a couple of mindfulness exercises. There are tons of them out there. If you just like Google mindfulness exercises, you'll find a ton. But I'm just going to highlight 3 really easy ones that are easy to do in like 5 minutes time. Whenever you're feeling stressed, anxious, it just really helps you calm down. So the whole point of mindfulness is really focusing in on the present. Usually when we're stressed, we're either focusing on the future or thinking about the past, but just focusing on the present can really help ground us. So the first one is called body scan. And this is kind of like what it sounds like. So you're basically scanning your body. You might start from head to toe or from your toes to your head, and just take time to really focus in on every part. Like, how does my head feel like right now? How do clothes feel on my body? Maybe I feel the chair like pressing against my body as I'm sitting on it. Just really focusing in on every aspect of your body and how it feels. The second is breath focus. So once again, this is something that kind of sounds, that is the way it sounds. So this is just taking time to focus in on your breath. So just inhaling deeply, maybe focusing on how the air that's coming in is cool, feel your lungs expand, holding for a couple seconds, and then exhaling through your mouth. And maybe this time the air feels warm, and just doing that a couple times to just really slow down your breathing. Because as I mentioned, when we're stressed, we have a tendency to breathe faster, and this really just counteracts that. And finally, the 5 senses exercise. So this is one that I do with my clients all the time. It's a really great grounding exercise to just help bring you to the present. So with this one, what you're going to do is you're going to start out with noticing 5 things you can touch. So for me right now, maybe I feel that my desk is smooth, or maybe I'm feeling like the texture of my clothes, they're a little warm. Just noticing like what 5 things around you can touch at that moment and how they feel. Then you want to focus in on 4 things you can see. So right now I can see my laptop, I can see my light and my plant, just noticing like the things around in your surroundings. Then you want to focus in on 3 things you can hear. So it's pretty quiet right now, but I can hear myself talk and I can hear my fan above me. But just focusing in on what different sounds you hear. Then you want to focus in on 2 things you can smell. And then finally, what is 1 thing you can taste? So these are just a couple exercises. As I mentioned, there's several apps out there and several different resources. I've actually connected a couple of resources that will be available at the end of this presentation. Next. All right, so in conclusion, stress is a daily part of life and it's going to affect everyone. Not all stress is bad. However, long-term stress can really harm your health. There are ways to manage stress, but if you're feeling overwhelmed by all the stress, please reach out to a health professional. We're here to help you through all of this. So thank you.
Awesome, Bianca. Thank you so much for that. I think it's like the perfect ending to all of this. So thank you. We have 2 questions that were asked. And again, if anyone has any questions, you can add them now. The first one is, I don't have a hard time falling asleep, but I always wake up in the middle of the night abruptly and worry. What can I do to address this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is very common. Some people might have no problem falling asleep. Usually if you wake up worried, I know like it's really frustrating because you really just want to get back to sleep. So if you have a lot of thoughts going on in your mind, maybe like have a journal by the side of your bed and like jot them down, kind of try to get them out. Also, sometimes if you kind of build a routine leading up to bed, so limiting your phone and technology usage like an hour before, creating some sort of routine like maybe reading or meditating or doing something in the hour before leading up to bed to help you kind of calm down. And then, yeah, also like focusing on your caffeine. Just all these little things are things you can maybe like tweak around and see what works for you.
Thank you for that one. I need to implement some of those too. How can we bring God into our stress and anxiety?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that spirituality is a huge protective factor. Just knowing that there is a higher power out there that's taking care of all of this and taking care of us, I think that does wonders in just helping us kind of de-escalate our stress and taking that controllability away from us in a sense. So whether that's praying for you or just meditating on all of this, maybe have like a favorite like verse of the Bible. I think these are great ways to just incorporate that spirituality.
Thank you. And then lastly, how can we slow down breathing specifically with children with autism? Do you know any specific exercises for them?
So I'm not a pediatric person, so this is not my specialty. But I'm sure if you were to look it up, I'm sure there's probably exercises out there for doing all of these exercises with children with autism.
Okay, and then yeah, we can also maybe do a little search as well and maybe send that later. We have one other question that's pending. Sorry, I'm receiving it right now. Sorry, guys. Is there a place that you know of where people can go speak to a psychologist if they do not have insurance?
Yeah, so I've actually, in my resources, I've actually connected a link to find a psychologist in your area. There are several places that might provide some sort of care without insurance. I know here at Loma Linda, we have the Behavioral Health Institute, Sachs Clinic. So all of these places do accept anything, even if you don't have any insurance. They also have like sliding scales. So I'm sure, I don't know if this is too far from you, but I'm sure if you look up the resource that I connected, there might be something on there.
Thank you. Yeah, I know in Orange County specifically, there is like Orange County has like a mental health department. They have offices all over Orange County. You can go there and get a referral as well. You don't need insurance for that. And like Bianca said, there are multiple nonprofits all throughout Orange County. A super easy resource is 211oc.org. And they have like different tabs, so you can just go to the mental health and they have like counseling services, and then they'll tell you if you need insurance or not. And again, the sliding scale, a lot of places will have that. And again, we will be sending all of these links later. So if that is it, I just want to turn it over to Angel really quickly, and then we will close.
Well, guys, I thank you so much for all of you who came and joined, took the time. I know it was pretty long, but I hope you guys felt the information to be very, very informative for you all. One ending point I want to say is, at the end of the day, when a large, let's say the big one happens, it's really going to rely on the plans that you've prepared, you've thought about ahead of time. We can't rely on the emergency responders to be there right away. I always tell people that it's going to be your family and those in your community that are going to be the ones that are going to be able to support you. So I hope you are able to gather some information or learn something new today and make it practical and create a plan. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Angel, and thank you to all of the presenters. Thank you, Angel. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Bianca. Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you so much to Lorena. She is behind the scenes right now. She is doing a lot of the work. She's the one making sure the slideshow goes smoothly and getting all your questions in. And thank you all so much for joining us and for bearing with us. Like we said, we know this is a lot of information, but we just appreciate your willingness to learn, and we're super excited that you all came to join us. And I think it was really amazing information. Like I said, we will be emailing this out to you all. So if you did not register through Eventbrite, we do not have your email. So if you could email us at anaheimsdaya@gmail.com or at outreach@Relove Church if you just want to get those to us, or you can put it in the chat. And we will be able to send all those resources out to you hopefully next week or by next week. And and we will also be posting this recorded seminar on YouTube. And so we will be sharing that as well. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. And yeah, just have a great night. and we hope that this leaves you prepared. Thank you. Good night, everyone.